All right, back here on SportsLine, we're opening up the phone, 737-7767. I want to update you a couple of basketball games, though, big basketball games tonight. One in particular, Vanderbilt's Kevin Stallings returning to his alma mater and taking on 14th-ranked Purdue inside Mackey Arena. And the Doors playing well tonight so far, kind of a defensive battle. 15 minutes to go in the second half, and Vanderbilt is on top of the 14th-ranked Boilermakers, 30-27. Of course, they're doing that without Luke Cornett, so that is a big deal for the Commodores if they could, in fact, hold on against a Purdue team that started this year 11-0 before losing over the weekend. Also tonight, Tennessee remains perfect at home this year. The Vols battled back from a second-half deficit to beat East Tennessee State 76-67. Tennessee State on the road tonight. Dana Ford taking the Tigers to 9-2 to start this season. He's back facing his alma mater tonight in Normal, Illinois. And the Tigers lose to Illinois State 66-55 to drop to 9-3 on the year. Tennessee Tech down big at Iowa 43-21 at halftime tonight. So a few college basketball scores to get out there to you. Also, one not of area note, but just kind of in general, Michigan State, the #1 team in the country, without Denzel Valentine, who out with a minor knee surgery, probably going to be out close to a month. Their first game without him tonight, playing Oakland at the Palace in Auburn Hills, just outside of Detroit, and barely holding on. The Spartans are up by 4 with about a minute to go in that game. So perhaps bad signs for Sparty. We'll have to play the next month without their best player, and in my opinion, the National Player of the Year to this point in Denzel Valentine. Back to the phones we go, talking a lot of football. Pro Bowl selections. Delaney Walker snubbed tonight, in my mind. What do you think? And what about the Titans moving forward? My idea, 12 keeper picks. Waive everybody else if you could, like a fantasy league. Would you take me up on that offer? Or do you think that's just a crazy idea, which it kind of is? So let's go to the phones now. And Leon. Leon, good evening. You're first up tonight on SportsLine.
Hey, Steve. How you doing?
Doing well, thanks.
Good. Well, first of all, I don't really think, you can waive. There are some serviceable players on the Titans roster. But the problem is there's no continuity in the front office as far as ownership to the GM, and where they really drop the ball is scouting. You have got to do a better job in the scouting department because they're just not cutting it in that area. And I mean, I think that they should trade out of the first round and possibly the second round because you can get a lot of good players, in the first 25 to 50 draft picks, So I think that they need some continuity in the front office, and they need to pick up the ball on scouting. They need to do a better job as far as scouting the talent. They just haven't done that, and that's why their draft choices the last few years have not measured up to what they did when Steve McNair and Samari Roll and all those guys were there. So I'll hang up and I'll let you talk, Steve. Thanks, man. Good to see you.
Thanks, Leon. We appreciate that. Great to be back. I will say that when you look at the draft picks, it has been disappointing at how they've performed. Just today, Mike Martin goes to injured reserve. He's missed the last half of the year. That's a third-round pick from a couple years ago. He's a guy that needs to be a factor for this team. Not necessarily a star, but needs to be a factor for this team. And he hasn't been. And you look at this year's team. I mean, Dorial Green-Beckham is a second-round pick. He's starting to come on a little bit down the end of the year. And I think he's going to be a pretty good player at some point for this team. But it took him almost a full year to get to that point. Justin Hunter, same position. Second-round pick who you traded up to get, has just not done anything for this squad up to this point. Jeremiah Patasi's your third-round pick. Not on the field right now for the Titans. May find a way there eventually, but not right now. Jalston Fowler, fourth-round pick. DeAndre's Mount hasn't done much for this team to this point. So there's just a lot of positions where the draft picks have not become key factors like you want. That's why, to me, one of the teams to really look at in the NFL Consistent winner. They've now done it through a couple different quarterbacks, few different head coaches. How about the Green Bay Packers? They continue to just turn homegrown talent into great football players and a good football team. Over and over again, we see that. There was a stat, it was back at the beginning of the year, so I can't tell you based off injuries how true it is right now. But they played on a Monday Night Football game early in the year, and the stat was that 49 of the 53 players on their roster that night were homegrown players. Guys that the Packers themselves identified and scouted, like you said, drafted and then developed them in to a core of a team that is now leading the NFC North once again and has been a consistent player in the postseason and obviously won a Super Bowl just a few years ago. That, to me, is the model way to do it. And the Titans are woefully behind that right now. Back to the phones and Ken. Ken, good evening.
Steve.
How are you?
Great to be here. Great to be there. Great to see you on TV again.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Best sportscaster in the area.
Well, thank you.
I agree with you on what your philosophy is, except I'd cut it back to 10. I wouldn't. I'd have to let Taylor Lewan go. When he's not false starting, he's not blocking, and he seems to be more worried about getting new tattoos on his arms than he is playing football. I think they're going to have to bring a coach in here and go from, like you said, top to bottom. They're going to have to reshuffle this whole deck of cards, and they're going to have a disciplinarian in there, and he's going to be one of these kind of Vince Lombardi type guys that's going to say, look, if you're not going to do what I tell you to do, you're not going to be here long. And that's just the way it's going to be. There's just a virus in that locker room that, you bring in an exceptional, great player, just like Marcus Mariota, and he's in there with that filtration of that I don't care attitude. They're going to get paid anyway. And you can see it. They're making millions of dollars, and they go out there and they throw a pass to them, hits them in the hands, and they drop the ball. And I just don't, they're just going to have to reshuffle the whole team, I think, and I agree with you on that. And that's all I got. Thanks.
Ken, we appreciate it. Always good to hear from you. I think the biggest miss for them is in that scouting realm, is that too many guys are playing out of position or not playing up to the level they thought. Again, I go back to the Parrish Cox example. He had a great year last year in San Francisco in a contract year, and the Titans got caught overpaying for a guy who they themselves said was going to compete to be a number 2. Well, now he's had to play as a number 1, and he hasn't played well. He hasn't played well down the stretch of this season. That's a problem. They've done that at other spots. They brought in Harry Douglas to be a real leader for this offensive unit, a real leader in the wide receiver room. Harry Douglas is a 3rd receiver, maybe a 4th receiver. He was really good in that role in Atlanta when you had to spend a lot of time looking at Julio Jones and Roddy White. Harry Douglas was great in that role. But here, where he has to be the guy or one of the guys, he just hasn't done it. And that's a real problem for this team moving forward. They've got to figure that out. Scouting, drafting, free agency, it's got to be better. They've got to change the culture. It is just a losing feeling when you walk into St. Thomas Sports Park right now. And it's interesting. Every year you hear how it's different, how it feels different than it ever had before. It feels eerily similar when you go and you've done it year in and year out, and you've covered the team year in and year out. I'll tell you what, in the past 5 years, the year that felt the most different was Mike Munchak's final season. That year they went out and they spent $100 million in free agency, brought in a bunch of guys because they were trying to get older and more experienced, the Bernard Pollards of the world. And you can argue about, obviously, how that individual selection picked out. or played out. But they brought in some guys who had some swagger and had a confidence and had won in other places before. It felt a little different in that locker room. And that team, if you remember, started 3-1. And then the injuries mounted and Locker was out and the season went downhill. They ended up at 7-9, although 7-9 looks pretty good right now, let's face it. But that was the one team that you felt had a little different attitude, that they believed, especially at the beginning, that things could be different. Even with Ken Wisenhunt last year, I think there was kind of a false bravado about how different things were going to be. But I don't know how confident that team was, especially a couple games into the season when they got beat up a couple times. I think it felt like the same old team very quickly. And then it got worse and worse. And last year, the attitude was probably as bad as I've ever seen it in that locker room. I think that is a big part of this. You've got to find guys who are good players, but you also have to find some guys to couple with the young talent to bring them up. To bring them up to a level of acceptable NFL standards in terms of your work ethic and your preparation and what's expected of you and how you're supposed to perform to try to win on Sundays. I think that's a big part of this equation for the Titans. We need to take a break. We will come back. And when we do, I want to address something else that Ken, the caller, just brought up. Taylor Lewan. He has not been super through 2 years. I will give you that. But I think he's taking a bad rap right now. And I will tell you why when we come back. Stay with us. This is SportsLine on News Channel 5+.